Regularly scheduled meeting for the Village of Tinley Park Plan Commission to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we will move on to roll call. Lori, if you can take the roll call.
Commissioner Gaskell.
Present.
Commissioner Gatto. Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Manny.
Present.
Commissioner Merrick.
Here.
Commissioner Shaw. Commissioner Sepisi.
Here.
Commissioner Truxell. Chairman Gray.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. We'll move on to communications. Staff, are there any communications at this time?
There are none.
Okay. We'll move on to the approval of the meeting minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 16, 2023 regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting?
So moved.
Okay, do I hear a second? Motion made by Commissioner Manny, seconded by Commissioner Gaskell. All those in favor of approving the February 16th, 2023 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. We'll move on to item number 1 for tonight. Item number 1 is a public meeting to consider recommending that the village board adopt the village's official zoning map reflecting map amendments through December 31st, 2022. So staff, at this time, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair Gray. So the purpose of this item is to just go over our zoning map. We update this once a year, annually. So the Illinois Municipal Code requires that municipalities do this by, through their board by March 31st of every year. There is an exception for home rule communities, but it's still generally good planning practice for us to have that go through on time. So these maps include updates to zoning changes that would be reflected graphically on the map, so things like subdivisions, creation of PUDs, that sort of thing. And we do have a GIS consultant that maintains the map online throughout the year, but when it comes time in the early part of the, every calendar year, we do have them create a PDF of a color-coded map for to act as a village's official map. So as far as a summary, we had one annexation with associated rezoning and plat of subdivision. So this is for the Marriott property near 183rd and LaGrange, on the east side of White Eagle Drive. We also had Oak Ridge subdivision as a special use planned unit development with their associated plat of subdivision. They're off of Oak Forest Avenue and Ridgeland. So that is a developer by D.R. Horton for townhomes and single-family residence. We also had a change of special use for a PUD on Tinley Downs Plaza. So that's at 171st and 80th Avenue, southeast corner. That's the plaza with the new Dunkin' Donuts and the inline tenant situation. So that came about due to the Dunkin' Donuts coming forth to the village for the development. And then as far as projects that simply have plat of subdivisions, Tinley Park Business Center, that is the Scannell property over at Harlem and Volmer. And then Loyola, as we all know, is anticipated to open later this year. They're at 100, southeast corner of 179th and LaGrange, and Atlas Putty as well on 185th. And then there was a residential subdivision, those of you who recall, it was 6523 Vote Street, where a large through lot was subdivided into 2 lots. There were a couple of corrections that staff noted, so we had a couple of boundary adjustments made. So one of them on 183rd, for example, had a split designation in a multi-tenant building. So Those corrections were made, and so as in the packet and up on screen and printed out is a blow-up of the map for the whole village. And if we wanted to take a look at any of them, we've got all parts of it zoomed in here. But otherwise, there's no action required from you, so no motion that you need to make. Simply, we recommend that the map update go to village board, so we have it scheduled for next Tuesday on March 21st.
Okay.
So that concludes staff presentation. Are there any questions?
Lori, is this a document that gets filed and saved and stored?
It does carry a resolution with it, so it is memorialized every year, and then the next year will.
About 3 pages back,
Mhm.
it showed the 7901 was West 181st Street. I think it's supposed to be 171st. Isn't that where the new Duncan went in? Is that an
That's the
issue?
East Avenue.
So
Yeah.
the Duncan was at Tinley Downs Plaza.
That's right.
Yeah,
He's right, yeah.
so that,
Is that something that has to be corrected, or is this just?
no, there was,
For the village.
Right.
Yeah, I guess before it goes to the board, you're right, yeah.
I think it's right on the actual map, it's just my typo.
Okay.
so we will, make sure if there's any documentation on that, to have that correct. But, otherwise, the document itself would be the map, so it's a graphic reflection.
Okay, so this is just a worksheet.
Yeah,
So
it
that
is,
would be-
staff report does have the 171st.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then our official, zoning atlas is the GIS website. But we have this printed copy just for reference.
Right.
Really, we just hang this in our cubicles so we could look at stuff quickly.
Okay. Okay. Good catch, though. Any other comments?
No.
Seeing none, the updates and the corrections look good. Okay. We'll move on to item number 2 for this evening. Item number 2 is a workshop to discuss existing and proposed fence regulations to the zoning ordinance. Staff, if you want to make your presentation at this time?
Sure, so I know many of you have been here for multiple fence discussions, so I'll try to keep some of the information you've discussed at length pretty brief. I'm going to go into the history real quick. The village board approved a major overhaul of fence regulations in 2018. This added clarifying language, diagrams, an administrative process for cornered lots to have a fence in some situations, and required conformance with the new standards upon replacement of the fence, replacement or repair of the fence. The board approved another modification in 2019, and that was to increase the maximum height from 4 feet to 5 feet of corner side yard fences, and that was corner front yard fences, excuse me, and that was to ensure that pools could be properly enclosed without needing a pool enclosure separately, because I think building code requires a 5-foot pool enclosure. And then we had several variation requests for corner lot fences in the past year. I think I counted 7. So the existing regulations for interior lots, privacy fences can be installed at the front setback line and behind the building line. Fences can be installed at the side and rear lot lines. For corner lots, privacy fences may be installed at the front setback and secondary front setback lines and behind the building line. For corner lots that share rear property lines, and there's a diagram on the next page. Corner lots that share rear property lines with another corner lot's rear property line can request an administrative approval to allow a 5-foot open-style fence to encroach up to 10 feet in the secondary front yard. And then non-conforming fences have to be brought into conformance. So here's the diagram. At the bottom is where you can find that rear-to-rear lot administrative variance. We tried to compare Tinley's ordinance to other jurisdictions, which is kind of challenging because no one does this the same way as anyone else. Everyone's kind of picked random things and random ways to say it, and some people have tables and some people have paragraph text, so it's difficult to compare. But we checked out 10 different jurisdictions to see how others handle it. I have a table up here that I know you can't read. It's in the staff report, if you'd want to switch back. But basically, I just looked at several similar communities, both in terms of like the historic downtown as well as the more recent suburban style development that we have around the village. Basically, some allow fences in the front yard, or some allow them in the secondary front yard, or some allow them at a certain distance from the property line or a certain distance from the house. So it's all over the place. Our recommendation for now is to consider a minor adjustment. We could add a provision to allow privacy fences 10 feet or more from the secondary front yard property line. Yard areas would be increased. It would be consistent across all zoning districts, so it would be easy for residents to comprehend and easier for staff to implement. And that would likely reduce the number of variations from the provisions on corner lot fences. We can discuss anything, but we've kind of highlighted that it might be worthy to discuss height limits for any encroaching fences, materials, some jurisdictions limited chain link in the front yard, and then the style, and that would be like open style or privacy style. And then we can, like I said, discuss anything else. But it would be helpful if we stuck to specific code sections, which is why I printed out the fence regulations for you. So at this time, we're kind of looking at making adjustments rather than an overhaul of the regulations. So if we're able to look at specific sections and say, well, that number is 5, maybe it should be 10, that would be helpful at this phase.
Okay.
So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Sure, Michael, but before I ask the commissioners for some of their comments, one of the things, just as a recap, that we've kind of seen, I know you guys in the staff report mentioned 11 cases have come, or variation requests have come in. So clearly, things need to be tweaked, because what we're doing isn't working per se, like it should. With that said, one of the problems I've seen with some of the people that have come up here in 2022 and some of 2023 is, it's Pandora's box. You have an aged subdivision, so they have like a non-conforming fence, and after 50 years, some new owner comes in with a family, young person, wants to replace the aged and decrepit materials, make it look nicer, but now all of a sudden they're gonna lose a portion of their backyard that they have already because the code wants them to have a larger setback. And then what happens is, looking at the code, we regrettably tell them, within reason, there's some options usually staff gives them, but that, we're not going to approve the variation. And we've seen a few of these, and what's kind of the paradox is, their fence would be an upgrade from the existing fence. And not just aesthetically, but in some cases, I remember it was a petitioner's neighbor said, the existing fence, you can't just replace the 8 feet, because he said it was like wet cardboard. It was that old and unsturdy. And people with young kids, it becomes a safety issue too, right? These yards are by streets. You don't want, God forbid, a kid to run out through a fence because it's aged and decrepit. So there's that aesthetics, the safety issue, but then, as staff report mentioned, the fine balance of use, right? If they lose X amount of square feet from their backyard, they're reticent to have that setback. So I'm just bringing that as a precursor, just to kind of refresh. And I know Steve is new to the board, but just as a precursor. And so at this time, I'll entertain more comments for discussion, starting with Commissioner Hamilton.
Something else that was pointed out in our earlier discussions was that some of the historical properties in Tinley also have non-conforming fences, right? So these are showcase locations, and yet they violate our rules. I thought that was kind of
No, but right, I mean,
ironic.
it's being, that hypocritical, I would say. We're showing this historical area, hey, this is Tinley Park, and great, and then someone sees, oh, Tinley Park looks beautiful. Hey, I want to do a fence like that, oh, sorry, you can't.
Yeah, denied.
So that's the, I mean, I'm aware, all the commissioners know that, this is one of my, issues with the fence regulation, I have so many, residents come to me and try to ask me, can I do a fence like this or not, And I stand, based on, your comments, Chairman, that, that our last, one of the last people who wanted that fence variation to be approved because they had a larger yard, I don't know how many linear feet of fence, right, but it was decrepit, falling apart, safety issue, and I'm sure when they saw the land, I'm like, wow, fantastic, But one of the things based on the code saying, you could only change an 8-foot section. So, just for aesthetics, so if I had to change an 8-foot section, okay, do it every year, and then the fence looks patchy, horrible, by the time you're done, you have to go back and do it again.
Well, and
You
that
know?
provision isn't even really intended for you to replace your fence year by year, panel by panel. It's really intended for, a tree fell on your fence and you should be able to
Oh,
put
right,
it back
yeah,
up,
I would've,
or someone crashed into it or something crazy, rather than the replacement. So it's even more restrictive than what you're saying now.
And I, just to anchor us, I gotta say, Michael, this was a very good chart. I looked at this chart, the report was good as well. And in the report, you give options about either defining it by a street, maybe some character, as you were mentioning, some are historical sections, Commissioner Hamilton. Although sometimes you just have a historical building inside, or, a subdivision that is not historical, right? They'll flag it. But you gave some options of potentially looking at doing it by maybe streets that have more historical buildings or even neighborhoods themselves, which I think is a good idea. However, I know there's a lot of legwork to kind of mark which ones are what.
It's always hard to draw a line.
Yeah. But, I mean, because even in the case Commissioner Manny was mentioning, if they brought that in, they still had a neighbor whose fence was far out, and then there was a gap, and that doesn't aesthetically look good. So it's this kind of, it's a fine balance, a fine equilibrium that we're trying to avoid or correct.
And can I throw on top of that, because I think there's two cases in which the rulings here, I know their recommendations have been overruled. One of them was the one where somebody would have had to then build an angled out fence to meet up to the neighbor, which was ludicrous, and the other
Yeah.
one was where the family put the fence in anyways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we can figure out whether or not it was on purpose or not, and then was declined, and then the board was probably like, why would we make them rip it out and put it back in? It looks good, right?
Yeah.
So, I love this idea about doing it by neighborhood, and I wonder, I mean, we do this thing about doing it by neighborhood in some other spaces, right? We did this for a particular PUD that was looking at, sunrooms, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where we
Yeah.
agreed that in this neighborhood, now there's two options to keep the aesthetics tied together, which maybe that makes it tough on you folks to figure out what's a neighborhood, what's not a
Right.
neighborhood, right?
Right.
But we've made these sorts of exceptions before, and then I think written them into the PUD. Like now, anybody else who wants to do it, it can be done administratively, you don't need to come back, right? That may be one way to handle that. because we're looking for conformity within that neighborhood, and then, clearly conformity, aesthetics, and safety, right?
Right,
Those are
yeah.
the three key pieces.
And when you start creating gaps and then ordering somebody to build another fence, well, you may have a gap then for temporarily before it gets built. You can have some issues there. So I concur. I think, and I'm not exactly sure where you would, if that would be a whole new section to the code, or if there's a point in the code. Because I know that's where you want to anchor it, Michael and Lori. But I do think that's probably a step in the right direction. What was proposed as a possibility in the staff report, I gotta find the right, was, it wasn't just, it was type 1 streets. You were mentioning Evanston and Plainfield and Lamont. They have different types of streets, and they'd say, this is a type 1 street, this is, and then there's also, Evanston also had, or sorry, Plainfield and Lamont had it for specific areas or neighborhoods rather than streets. And Commissioner Merrick makes a good point about, I remember the sunroof one too, where, oh, you have more than just one or two, so now when whoever comes, they don't have to go through the whole rigmarole. With that said, I know one of the other things that was pitched potentially was add additional landscaping. I actually think that's not, even though it's still aesthetics, I think that's not like the essence. The essence is get the fence right, and then why burden some homeowner spending all that money on a nice fence to keep up plants and keep up flowers or whatever shrubs or what, you know, that would be my personal opinion based on what I saw in the staff report. And then I know you also mentioned about the prohibited fences in the front yard if we have 4-foot open fences. Is that correct? That was a possibility.
There's basically, not necessarily at this exact moment, but eventually we're kind of going to look at the whole section. So I would say most things would be on the table.
Okay.
So if that 4-foot open fence in a front yard was deemed appropriate, you know, village-wide, certain areas,
Right.
certain streets, you know, that's something we can consider.
Right.
Right now, we allow decorative fences in front yards, so I think those can be
Yeah,
2.5
legacy.
feet tall,
Up to 2 feet tall.
up to 2 feet tall.
And then, of course, we have the legacy district.
Right, and
Which
that
is
has
a
its
little bit
own
different.
fence provisions, which couldn't very easily just be applied one block over. You know, there's a lot more that goes into stylistically what's happening on Oak Park Avenue versus one block over.
Sure.
And I will also add that hedges are not considered fences, so people who want to visually enclose their yard still have hedges. I know it's expensive, but they have hedges as an option as well.
Oh, that's true, man. But I know people with little kids, they're gonna just go right underneath between the,
Yeah, Homer Simpson style.
yeah, Homer Simpson style, that's right. Uh, Any other comments on, to provide some, one thing that was mentioned was, and you had it in your slide, can we stick to these if you want to go back to that? The fence height, I'm okay with the fence heights as they are, right? It's 5 feet, but you got the 6-inch and you got the 6-inch at the bottom, right? So it's like a 5-foot privacy fence, but no more than 6 inches from the ground. And then you might have some posts that are about 6 inches higher. And I think that's reasonable. I don't think it has to be increased. Materials,
Reasonable in general, or reasonable for encroaching front yard fences? Because right now, we only allow open style fences in secondary front yards when we allow that encroachment.
because of the sight lines from the road?
I would say it's more of a aesthetic decision.
Okay.
When you're that far from the street, you don't really have that sight line problem like
Okay.
you would if the fence was
Oh,
much
a
closer to the
secondary
sidewalk.
backyard, okay, yeah.
Yeah, secondary front yard,
Oh,
right.
a front yard, okay.
Yeah.
I noticed one of the, yeah, okay. What, I noticed in the staff report, you had the open fence example, but it had a pool. And I thought it was next to the front yard, but I'm assuming that was just for the fence and not for, okay. Okay,
Decorative.
Any comments on that, the type of, whether it's, you know,
Well, my comment, you know, for open style, and I brought this up before in the previous, discussions, comparing residential and commercial. For commercial fences or railings and such, the opens can't be greater than 4 inches, right? Why? For child safety, because they could get their head stuck stuck or fall through. So, I think for homes, it should be, something similar, because you wanna contain your children, your pets or what have you. And if they're, based on the code, if you have a eight, section or, panel, and you're saying 50%, so you're gonna have an 8-inch opening, your safety is out the window. It's just more of a boundary thing, but if again, you have small children and, family coming over and they have small children, that safety, thing is gone.
Yeah, well, and that's the deal, we could talk about privacy fences versus the
Well, right,
open style.
privacy fence, obviously
Yeah.
solid, but then an open fence, I would say, it can't be larger than,
But do we want to be prescriptive, because that could end up cutting out, how some people do the X-style decorative fence, we wouldn't allow those in that instance.
Well, right, but just in general, if you just have your planks like that, if it's larger than 4, like I said, it just depends on gallon style, whoever wants to make, their fence, it could be X or whatever, what
Mhm.
have you, but, just that opening size, that's what's critical, and then sightlines, what's the criteria on that? If someone wants to see if they meet the criteria, we should have, what's the angle, how far from the street to make sure, so some home owner could do the math and like, hey, I could do it, my sightlines are perfect, I got nothing to worry about, I
Right.
meet, what the code says. So I think that criteria should be spelled out.
And that's the intention of the proposed 10-foot from the property line setback, is you'd end up with a site triangle as you're backing out of your driveway just by being 10 feet from your property line. So when we're talking about, streets intersecting, we do have specific provisions on that. Generally, they're not going to apply to fences so much, because that's not the area we're talking about allowing them necessarily. But that 10-foot setback from property lines would probably accommodate like the driveway sight line to make sure you could see onto the
Oh, no, yeah, I
sidewalk
see
before you
that,
back up.
But again, if someone wanted to, like for me, again, this is what I do, this is my profession, I'm an architect, right? So I look at, everything that code indicates to make sure I could maximize, my client's needs and wants. So that's something that has to be stipulated, kind of like what we did, a couple of, plan commissions that we wanna stipulate how to, what was that one, just the regulations, the process of doing things,
Oh, yeah.
we wanna make sure that we spell everything out so everyone can read it, understand it, not just, someone saying, being arbitrary or not clear, I think that's what I wanna say. It just has to be clear and,
And I understand what you're saying, like, you don't, in certain instances, and going back to the, fence styles, you don't wanna have something where it's restrictive, but but to Commissioner Manny's point, if there's, some guidelines to keep it, no pun intended, but open to different scenarios or alternatives.
right.
And the one thing I noticed with a lot of the stuff that came through us is, we had some, funky backyards, or it wasn't your garden variety stuff where you have a cross intersection and their backyard abuts somebody else's backyard. In most cases, some cases we had that. A lot of times we had like some, and that in of itself wasn't unique, right? The property was there for a long time. You have an intersecting roadway that's on a oblique angle instead of a right angle. But yeah, I think some sort of guidance that isn't restrictive or prohibitive
Right.
to alternatives.
But then I also, Lori, I don't know if you're able to, you know, I sent you some photos,
Mm-hmm.
you
Do
know,
we have
if you
them?
wanna see.
I have them here.
You know, let's, you know, just, let's taking, you know, see, I don't know which one. I mean, did you place all the photos up? Cause I kinda like, you know.
I don't have them all like on one slide, but I do have them all in
well,
the
Well, I
presentation.
numbered them so it could be, you know.
Yeah, this one is the, I think you
See
had
if
them
they're
A1,
okay.
A2. Do you want me to go to the next one? This one has a chain link fence with a hedge around it.
You know, well, I think I wanna then send the commissioners, you know, the photos how I numbered them, so they could be,
These are in that order.
I'm
Each
sorry?
each slide is, you had them
Yeah, I had
like
you know,
1A, 1B, that's how they're in that order.
101, you know.
Yes.
You know, just so you can see, just, you know, disregarding our current fence regulations. I wanted to see like, how does that fence look to you? You know, does it detract from that block, from that area? You know, because my original question when I asked Dan, when we started to change the code, the fence regulation, I go, didn't anyone have in mind how many, or like all the fences at Tinley Park are gonna be non-conforming? You know, how that's becoming I would say, a detriment to all homeowners. And just cause someone said, hey, I don't like my neighbor's fence, so someone came here to the village and made up you know, brought up an issue, hey, fences, so then someone thought, okay, well, let's, you know, but all of Tinley Park, based on our current code, no one can replace their fence if it's not conforming at all, or, you know, or a family coming in, hey, I wanna put a fence, whatever, oh, I can't? You know, so I think this, you know, and I said in the past, this fence regulation code is too restrictive, and that's how, you know, if you wanna cycle through the fences, again, this is a fence that's open, you know, or privacy, however you wanna like it, but the spaces are nice, or keep the kids in, keep the dog in, you know, but if you wanna cycle through the next photos, again, this one's showing that, you know, front of the house, you know, and then they have their fence all the way to the, you know, to the sidewalk, and then I show the side view of it. I mean, is it, you know, I'm asking the commissioners, is it ugly? Is it, looks nice? I mean, the color could, I mean, I would pick a, you know, paint it something else, you know, aesthetically, but is it, how bad is it? You know, if you could cycle through to the next one. Okay, this one is one that has a chain link fence that's, you know, on the front yard and secondary, right? But the only thing I don't like about that one, you know, is rusty and everything, but that's why our code says we need to chain link, have it coated or something that just to make it look, keep it looking nice, you know, but again, it's transparent, but, you know, it does the job with what, you know, what the homeowner wanted, you know, and I think that one is the only one that has, you know, again, fencing on front in the primary and secondary yards. The other ones were, again, just on the secondary, you know, out to the sidewalk, you know, and they, to me, they look fine, you know, nothing glaring, but again, that's just my, you know, my perspective of it.
You have one more example here.
Yeah, see that, again, that one, you know, that one, I didn't have the front shot because I don't know that, you know, based on Google, you know how sometimes you get a different time shot or year shot, so that one was gone, but again, it's just showing, that one's kinda like 10 foot out from the, you know, from the lot line, so, I mean, that one too, I mean, that one, you know, looks fine to me.
Yeah, and of the examples, this one is one, I mean, I'm not out there with a tape measure, so I can't say definitively, but it's very likely that this one would not be requiring a variance or an administrative approval if we are to go through with this proposed strategy of creating that 10
Well, like
foot
the
from the
others.
sidewalk.
Right,
Yeah.
but like the others that showed up to the sidewalk, again, you know, and those are the type of homes that or residents come to me, like, why can't I have it? You know, or make it look nice, that house looks nice, with it, you know, but I can't have it. You know, so that's why this, you know, just the fence regulation to me, it's, you know, it's, too restrictive, you know.
I will say this too, you mentioned the open fences, and the kids are one thing, but one thing I did neglect is those pets, and you do have a dog that maybe isn't the best in terms of temperament when it comes to neighbors, and runs through the slats, and runs down the road to bite somebody. So it's probably, and I know just as a pet owner, I wouldn't want my, cats to get off the property and get hit by a car or something like that. So, there's something else to be considered as well, rather than like you were mentioning, a 4-inch minimum. But-
Along that line, you have to also consider, like in my neighborhood, the predator animals,
Oh, yeah.
the coyotes and stuff that can just
Yeah, you got those
jump a fence,
coyotes.
go and get killed, injure whatever your other pets, maybe even your kids and stuff. There needs to be, and maybe it's on an individual basis, but there needs to be some consideration for child and pet safety in those areas with regard to where the fence is going. The open fences, I see these all the time, they squeeze right through, and that's a situation. So, point is well taken, the dogs on the inside of the yard can be very, very dangerous, but what gets inside the yard from the outside to get the dog
True.
is, it's a definite problem, right on my block, it's a definite problem.
I think it's a problem everywhere. I
I'm
mean,
not sure how much of the village has that problem.
I live kind of in the middle of,
And you
I
get
don't
them, and you're.
I get foxes and coyotes and stuff climbing my fence and
Oh my
going
God.
out of the yard. I don't have any pets, so it doesn't bother me, but it's all over the place, it's not just,
Yeah.
I have heard coyotes at night once in a while in downtown Tinley where I live, so, and the
Well, our
cats
neighbors,
get
They just
weird.
prance down the street like they own the block, and I mean, that makes me worried, because the guy across the street from us, he's a village employee, his grandkids are constantly outside. Lately, I've noticed that they're never outside without him being there. So it's a definite concern.
Okay.
We see, also, I mean, you wanna protect within, now you gotta protect from, like you're saying,
Absolutely.
animals coming in,
Without, yeah.
rabid dog, whatever,
We get
you
kids
know?
on street corners waiting for school buses and stuff too, and these animals, if they're hungry enough, they're gonna go after whoever they can go after. So if they can get in, if the kids are on the corners, there's not much you can do about it.
aside
But if
from,
the kids were in a yard,
building a dome over your property and stuff, there's no way that you're gonna keep them out.
my daughter's already convinced we live in a weather bubble as it is, so.
Well, Michael, can,
Restricted weather bubbles for all.
and moats. Michael, can you put back on the screen the 4 items that you wanted to concentrate on? You're done with your
No, yeah, I
slides
think
then?
I was done, you know.
Commissioner Mann?
Again, you know, it's too restrictive, and I have many, many, many residents that would like to build a fence, you know, that's nice, you know, because it just makes their property values go up, and, you know, and enjoy their home, enjoy their land.
Well, I wanna make sure we refocus to make sure we give you guys what you need here. In terms of the, I'll start with the easiest height limit. Is there any issues on the changing of the height limit? Or just keeping it at the,
From 4 to 5.
4 to 5?
well, it's 5 right now for the backyard. The front yard was 4 feet, right?
Right.
If there is one, even though it's prohibited. Right,
Well,
decorative is
And it
2
would
feet.
depend on what we're talking about for the location of the
Right.
fence. Maybe you may want to look at a lower height that gets closer to the property line.
In a standard backyard, we currently allow 6 foot. So if we are to approve this
Okay.
encroachment change, is a 6-foot privacy fence appropriate there? Or do we want to look at 5-foot open fence? How do we want to restrict in that scenario?
I'm convinced by comments from Commissioner Manny and Sefasi on the, on having a privacy fence rather than open. And plus, if people have maybe they're putting out the wash or they have a pool or something else too, right? You really don't need people gawking, but, I would be okay with privacy fences versus open fences, but then you might have somebody come back and say, I want an open fence. And then are we restricting them on that?
What's the rule
Well-
right now?
They could still have an open fence, we're not eliminating that, are we?
Well, yeah, an open fence is, well, we have privacy and open, and there's a 50% threshold of open space. So, we're not necessarily looking at reducing the opening size. If someone wants to come in for a pool permit, there are specific fencing requirements for that, for safety.
Correct.
But in this case, we have these two types that are defined by code, privacy or open. And really, the allowance of them may depend on where we're wanting to look at in the code.
And the kind of main difference or like aesthetic consideration is this top graphic where you have a neighbor building a fence in their secondary front yard, and it projects further out against their neighbor's front yard. So, maybe
Primary.
that irritates the neighbor, that they have to look at a fence that's further out. Maybe that's fine, but that's kind of the other
Right.
angle of this is for that next door neighbor, how does that impact their view? Currently, that's why we allow that 10-foot administrative adjustment to allow open style encroachment 10 feet out. But if we're looking at changing how that works to be 10 feet from the property line, then you'll have a larger view impact for that neighbor.
Right.
So if you have an R1 setback, that's 40 feet, so there's, the administrative approval in that case could be a 5-foot tall open fence that is 30 feet from the property line, because it's 10 feet from the setback line, versus looking at something like from 10 feet from the property line, it's, there's more coverage to have in the yard. Also, something like this would be consistent. If you have one home next to another that's in a different zoning district. So,
And this, if we are to go through with this 10-foot from the property line change, it would substantially increase the size of a lot of yards in Tinley Park.
Absolutely.
Substantially. Some of the property owners that will be less impacted are the ones that have the very large, 4,000 square foot ranch. Because they already have such a limited yard space, this 10-foot really might not make a huge difference for them. Especially because that 10-foot along the side of the house is maybe useful for nothing except a dog run.
So I'd say, just getting the temperature in the room from the commissioners, we would be supportive of that 10-foot.
10 foot from the lot line?
From the lot line, yes,
Does
that
the-
setback.
Does the commission have any thoughts on the height and whether it's privacy or open?
Well, the only issue would be is if there's a sightline problem, and as you mentioned, it's 6 foot from the slat, but or to the top of the fence, but then it also gives you another 6 inches to any posts, but, I'm with Commissioner Gaskell where you'd have that user's choice, right? If
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have a pet.
Right.
Right, and they wanna see out into the neighborhood, and they sit on their back porch. And, but also don't want people walking through their backyard, right? So it's a user's choice, I would imagine, on something like that. I think a 6-foot maximum height seems reasonable. I know that was originally for pools, right, instead of having something around the pool versus 5 feet. Any comments on that, whether it should be dictated 6 feet if there's a pool and 5 feet if there's not, or?
I will also add that we do have a kind of blanket provision in here that says clear sight triangles must be maintained. So as fence permits come through, we would review for those sight lines to make sure that we don't
Okay.
have a dangerous situation.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Oh, no, right, that's what I'm saying, and then, you know, stipulate the criteria of the sightlines, you know? Because if I wanna do it, okay, it says here, measure from the center of the road, whatever feet back, it has to be, you know, 30-degree angle, you know, and then I'm gonna go do it, hey, I'm good. And then I'll call you guys, and you guys double check it, but I know I'm good, and then I could, you know, move forward, you know, not, you know, just, not saying that I won't trust you guys, right, but I wanna do it and make sure it's, you know, feasible.
So I have a
Yeah.
question about that. So, I like that idea, but I think we're now moving towards people being able to like order building permits or these sorts of things. And we had somebody once where they ordered something and had it installed and they had it approved by you, but you don't come and check until after it's all done, right? So, I mean, maybe moving this out and having the sightlines piece laid out leads to more cases where, once it's put up, you go check and then it doesn't match, and then they come in to ask for a variance, right? But I don't know that we could grant a variance where it created a danger situation, right?
Right, oh, right,
In those
right.
cases, they'd
Right.
have to redo it.
And that's how it works with any building or any
Okay.
permit. You know, if someone puts in a permit that they're building a pool at this location, they put it in the wrong location intentionally or inadvertently, the pool has to move. That's
Okay.
it. So it'd be the same situation with the fence. If where they put it on the permit differs from where they installed it, then it needs to move.
Okay.
And to Commissioner Merrick's point, though, if they could be stressed, you know, that, you know, buyer beware if this is installed where it's dangerous, because there's no ifs, ands, or buts then. It's not like just tomato, tomato, and it's a preference. That would be something that could potentially cause accidents and harm, you know, to human health and whatever else, so.
And it doesn't stop them with a pool, with the fence, from, at the time of construction, they notice something's not gonna be right and they do wanna move it. There's nothing to stop them from making a phone call or coming back in and
Exactly.
saying, hey, we gotta change this. At least be upfront about it and then see where the chips fall.
Some people want to ask for forgiveness rather than permission,
Yeah,
though.
exactly, so, yeah,
That's
it's
how
always better to
unfortunate
say, I'm
work.
sorry.
Yeah, like a foundation, you know?
So, yeah, so I think that's reasonable, and you guys will see it, and there may be some, like you said, ultimately, the village has control to say, take it down. And I know, you know, if it costs money to put up, it's gonna cost money to take down too, so. You would hope people would wanna do something in good faith, but and it's not necessarily an intended thing to do, sometimes just people, oh, the guy was there, they said they could do it now, and, oh, that saves me time, and then it doesn't save you time. So,
Are we comfortable with that 10-foot from the side, or from the property line setback? Property line, excuse me?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds.
Have anybody else on the,
When you say 10 feet or more, you know, so what's the or more, what's the?
That's just to say that you don't have to install your fence at 10 feet. You could, you know, put it at,
12, 15.
right, yeah, it could be closer into your house, but not further out than 10
Right,
feet
just not
from the
along the
sidewalk.
sidewalk like
Right,
Fort
right,
Apache.
right.
so, and then I just, going back to Commissioner Manny's pictures, that last one looks like that would meet, but those other ones with the chain link fence all along
Or
the,
even up to the sidewalk, like
yeah,
I
up to
said,
the
you know,
sidewalk.
I was trying to get the commissioner's opinion on
Yeah,
it. Is it horrifying,
Yeah, it is. It's just
you know,
block, up to the sidewalk like that, closed fences up to the side, open fences
closed,
is not a big
open,
deal.
whatever, you know?
Well, that's a
just
hazard
getting-
anyway.
Well,
because
closed
that guy
fences,
coming out of his
closed fences
driveway,
is a hazard.
He's got no view.
I like the 10 feet.
I think 10 feet's
Yeah, I'm good at
reasonable.
10 feet.
I think that's reasonable. But we may
So-
see some of those pictures come in when they change their rusted fence. So,
So I reviewed
Can't
six
pile onto it.
previous variances that we did, you know, some were approved, some were denied. Of those 6, 2 of them would not have been needed with this rule change. So you still would have required a variance for 4 of those, may or may not be approved, but 2 of them would have been covered in that 10 feet allowance. So reduces our, you know, variances by a third. That's kind of our goal here, is to reduce the variances, so I would say it would be successful at doing that.
Well, it's also better serving the residents. It speeds up the process for them. If they can come in here and in one 30-minute office visit, get everything done and straightened out, and they're ready to go build, rather than wait maybe 2 weeks for a hearing.
Well, it's also pretty straightforward. It's a lot easier to understand to tell them 10 feet from your lot line. Where is that? In most cases, it happens to be a foot from the sidewalk, rather than explaining, okay, you're in the R1 district, you have 40 feet, subtract from that line. So, you know, having it as a set number, consistent throughout the zoning districts, we think this is a good step to help reduce
Here's
the
another
variations.
piece that will happen likely, is some of those other 4 would have been cool with this, and might not have come in for anything other than an administrative, right? So you replace the fence that's falling down, and instead of doing it 8-foot sections every year, right, to game the system, they say, oh, okay, we're gonna lose some yard, but not that much, that's okay. Not
And-
just, you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
As opposed to like, oh, it's all the way back here and we get nothing. And we
Right.
thought when we moved in, we'd get that same thing,
Yeah.
right?
It's also, you know, when you come in and you have to do a variance and you're paying and going through a process, it's kind of like, well, why not ask for 30 feet? I only want 10, maybe they'll give me something. So maybe it'll cut down on the ask as well, so that number might even be lower.
True, true. So, but you said 2 would make it, right? And I just have a question, because I know after us, we can get overruled. We're just a recommending body, but did you reach out to those 2 people to let, even though we're not there yet, but if this passes through the village board, I think it'd just be a good practice to reach out to those people who, because I'm sure they still would want a fence if they're not one of the cases that we saw, who then either, whatever, still had one built or whatever. But, and just let them know, you know, things have changed. If they want to, they don't need a variance, only for good faith. They did a process, got denied. That might be a little good news for them in 2023, if it, you know, if it gets adopted. Just to consider that, Mike.
Unless they already
Michael.
put up a conforming fence.
Then don't let
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't tell them.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
good
ask,
point.
don't tell.
Good, okay, good point. Yeah, because we had options, other options too, but that is true, good point.
So I'm hearing that the 6-foot height is okay, the 10-foot distance from the property line is okay. How do we feel about open style versus privacy?
That might be a question of location.
Correct.
Is it a back fence? Is it a side fence where your neighbors are all agreeable? I mean, certainly nothing out in front. I called today and canceled the 8-foot stockade fence in front of my house. But that might be, there might be a lot of individuality involved there.
So top graphic here, the red dotted line that says prohibited fence, we would say that style would need to be open style.
No,
Yeah.
That's like the locational criteria. That you're
I
talking about?
thought we already said it could be by choice, whatever they,
Right. I'm asking Commissioner Sepisi if that's what he was intending.
Well,
Is that the locational criteria you're talking about?
yeah, I mean, it's gotta be, again, aesthetics comes into view here. That's a street that's in front of that, so that's actually a secondary side yard. So there needs, you know, if he wants the fence for the extra, was that extra 10 feet, is what I'm seeing?
This was the old graphic, so this is 10 feet from the setback line.
Yeah.
So in this example, 10 foot from the property line would be even further out.
Yeah. I don't know, I think semi or open would be a better choice in that respect.
Right.
But then you're talking about kids and animals again,
Yeah.
so. I really think honestly, with all due respect, some things are gonna have to be handled on an individual basis still.
I mean, they're gonna come in theory, they should be coming to you before, but with the permit, but,
Well, and, we're trying to write specific standards that are applicable across the board and kind of punting every unique situation to you guys, so,
That's,
we're trying to punt it back.
yeah.
So what are our current rules?
The current rules in the bottom graphic would allow a 10-foot encroachment from the secondary front yard setback line out into the secondary front yard.
And what type of fence?
That can only be open style, no more than 5 feet tall.
No chain link.
Yeah, I like no chain link for sure.
Chain link's getting a bad rap, but it's true. Chain link's kind of ugly.
Chain link is allowed in general, but for that type of secondary front yard administrative approval, it's not.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I would consider is if it's open, maybe open and semi would be the two choices. I don't think you want, like I said, you don't want porta-patch on that side.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, Michael, that you bring up the view being obstructed of the neighbor, right? If that red line goes up further, right, towards the street, which it will, all of a sudden, maybe somebody sits on their porch and they look now, they're gonna just see a fence when they turn to the left. So,
On the other hand, that's just, having neighbors.
that's true
People
too.
could, install plantings along their neighbor's fence sticking out in their front yard, and maybe they don't miss it so much, so there's balance.
Right, I mean, it depends on the unique situation and the individuals involved, right?
Right, but I think also too, like of all the fence variations that we had, have we had a neighbor opposing that?
Yes, we did. So,
Once.
I don't
yes.
recall, I mean, maybe I
Yeah,
was missing that.
You might have
paper.
been missing, but
But
the
it was-
neighbor came and said his piece.
Maybe one out of, what, 100? Because everyone's, you got the neighbor, oh, yeah, it looks great, it's gonna be fantastic.
I'd say-
But I never,
Recent memory, 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 7,
Yeah.
and was very vocal.
But it
So-
strikes me that that was like a long-going, ongoing thing.
Yes, right,
And I'm not sure it was about a fence.
yeah.
yeah,
Right.
see, it was something
True
else.
story, fence putting the trigger.
We were just having a feud for whatever, right? But,
Right,
usually all the neighbors are like, yeah, we like it, it's not gonna bug me.
right. Most times, I agree with Commissioner Manny, if there is people that come, they typically are supportive or will give testimony that supports the need of a fence or an upgrade at least, regardless of, the specifics are under the code umbrella, but most times, yeah. Okay, did that answer your question, though? You wanted to know if it's,
No.
We did make
Okay.
a good question.
No.
Well, and, it's a difficult question, so
Yeah.
I understand the, the back and forth.
right,
But we do need something that would be applied universally.
right.
So if it makes sense, we would maybe be seeing an increase of variances, but if we were to require open style, someone could come in and say they want a privacy style. That's something you guys could consider.
Except, so once we start looking at the criteria, and when somebody wants a privacy style, the only reason we could do it could be for likely none of the reasons that they're gonna bring to us. I have kids, we have a dog, it's a busy street, none of those are acceptable reasons for us to make a variance, and if we feel as if, because we've been in this situation
Right.
before, where if it weren't for the rules, it looks fine,
Yeah,
right? We'd all be fine with it. And if that's the case, then we ought to just be more flexible, right? If it's not gonna undermine aesthetics, safety, those things. So, I don't care if it's open or if it's closed, as long as it's not chain link.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
then I haven't really seen what it would look like in life
right.
if it were
And
closed, right?
I just don't see a person putting a closed fence on 2 sides of the property and then get to that third side there, shown in red,
And just
and make it open.
Oh, yeah.
You know, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, you're gonna get one fence, one style,
Correct.
so,
And that person who has a red fence that's going further out, is gonna have, if they have a privacy fence, they're gonna have the privacy fence all back along that yard anyways. So even if you didn't have the piece that was jutting out, you'd have the piece connected to it that blocked your view.
That's true.
So I don't really think it makes any difference.
Yeah.
I mean, in that particular case, the backyard is obviously the only place for a swimming pool. And by restricting that to an open fence, you lose all your privacy.
Yeah, that's true. And nobody wants to see me sunbathing, I'll tell you that. But with that said,
And my
I
neighbors
would,
go in the house when I'm outside.
I would say, that it would be on the, I mean, the umbrella of either or, right? If somebody wants an open fence because
Right.
for whatever extenuating circumstances are specific to them, and somebody wants a closed fence for kind of the extenuating circumstances Commissioner Merrick mentioned, kids, dogs, or pool, as Commissioner Gaskell mentioned, then they get to choose that, right? You know, that's very owner-specific.
Right, the preference, you know, you wanna
Yeah.
be private and no one peeping in, great. Or you wanna have it open, but keeping safety in mind, you know, less than 4 inches. Fantastic, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
Can that be worked into the code then, like an all-encompassing either or? Is that not preferred by
So
staff?
that, currently we have 50% is the definition of open. So that might be a picket fence, or it could be the bar style that you see, wrought iron, something like that. The building code would determine, I believe, if there's an issue with, you know, someone's head getting stuck. I think those rules are really intended for railings. So I suppose we could add gaps maybe no larger than 4 inches or whatever is appropriate.
I mean, they can assign that to railings, I'm sure we can assign that to fences as a safety factor, I mean,
Cause again, cause that it has to be, can't be larger than 4 inches
right.
on the commercial code. So I'm saying if we do that for restaurants, for the railing, you know, so the kids won't be able to pass through, I'm saying we should make that as well for, again, for homes. You're protecting the children from getting stuck or, you know, getting loose, you know.
It's
And it can
already,
still be
it's
open,
already,
right?
it's already a code for indoor railings.
No, but I'm just, saying, you know,
Around your
I'm
stairway
saying
and
like
stuff,
if
you
you have
gotta have 4
a
inches.
6 foot, you know, inch picket and based on the code, 50% open, so it's like 6 foot picket, 6 foot opening, 6 foot, but that 6 foot is large enough for
You mean
a
6
child to
inches?
Six
get
inches,
through,
6 inches.
Yeah.
a dog to, whatever. But code on the commercial side, it has to be less than 4 inches, cause the inspector comes with a 4-inch sphere and they do the test. If it goes through, you got to, you know, they'll flag it, you gotta stop, you have to redo your rating, you know. you're-
I mean, how hard is that 50%?
Some other jurisdictions had, I think I saw 80%.
You see, even so,
Open.
you're gonna have like a picket every,
Yeah.
every 6 feet?
So
That's
that would
crazy.
be to the point where it would either be allowing something very bizarre, like you would have, you know, a 4-inch slat and then a gigantic gap next to it. And
Yeah.
then, so it wouldn't even be a fence. It would look like someone ripped all the
I'm
posts
telling
off a
you, that's
fence.
what I'm
Right.
saying, yeah.
Or it would be the wrought iron style or the bar style fences that they have.
Right, I mean. it
And
could
so
be-
that would require the distance between the bars, or would alter the distance between the bars. I don't know if we need to touch that. I think 50% is enough, and I can double check with the building official that we would be reviewing the slat distance or whatever, to make sure no one's head goes in there.
Right.
But I will say, if it's larger than, you know, a child's head, then, you know, if I don't have a dog, I don't have kids, then why can't I have, you know, the fence the way I want it?
Yeah, sure.
There are requirements
Well, you can't call it
that our
safe,
zoning
you know.
administrator handles for fences that want to go around pools.
Right.
So,
Uh,
you know, there are specific
Yeah.
parameters that are identified.
so probably so somebody can't squeeze in a space?
Exactly.
Yeah, right, and then-
And we do we review, you know, every aspect of the fence when we're reviewing the fence permit, so
Okay.
I don't know that that needs to be memorialized in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
But we could do that if we, you know, deem it's appropriate. if you
I-
guys
I mean,
deem it's
it-
appropriate.
I trust your judgment on that. If you feel that it does not need to be memorialized, I think memorializing it is gonna lead to more conversations like this.
Yeah, then someone comes in for a variance because
Yes.
they want a slightly different fence.
Because there was one thing we didn't think of on tonight, right? And we're down 2 people, so, okay, so going back to your punch list.
So my last question would be the material question. It sounds like we're mostly on board with no chain link. Are there other styles we want to prohibit? I don't know there would be any, but, you know, feel free.
The part of the regulations that said no sharp edges or anything, does that include, what do I call it?
The
top,
mast,
the top.
yeah, the top.
You know,
Does that
on a
include
wrought iron
that?
fence, you get the top, and it's usually cut to a point.
Yeah, the fin or whatever you call it at the top. Would that be addressed right there?
I think the language is broad enough that we would say that at permitting, that you can't have some, you know,
You can't have
sharpened
spikes.
spike as your finial, maybe it's called, of the top of your fence.
But again, I still think that now we're infringing on the design now or something,
No, we're talking about a safety issue
you
now.
know?
Oh,
Unless
yeah.
you're gonna jump off the roof and land on it, you know?
But somebody will climb over the fence.
Kids
and
are
land
gonna
on it.
climb the
You know,
fence
but
though.
you shouldn't be climbing no fence.
Well,
Well, no, you shouldn't be, but it's gonna
Shouldn't be
You know.
climbing through fences either, right? So,
They're
You know,
kids.
that's what I see. like,
In an
you know,
ideal world, you
telling
shouldn't have
how to-
trespassed on anybody's property. You shouldn't even look in their property.
And, you know, I mean, there's a huge difference between, you know, I touch it and my finger's bleeding versus it is, you know, the style of a classic Chicago wrought iron fence. The former we would care about. I don't know that we would care about the latter.
Right,
It's hard to get to like the degree of sharpness of
yeah,
a fence.
or you'd be impaled.
Right.
So, could you read that? That's exactly.
So the language right now that you have, according for this, for materials, no chain link, and everything else would be kind of what you see and what you guys deem as appropriate as staff that comes.
Yeah, and I mean, what we would, you know, see that what probably 100% honestly of people are doing is the vinyl fence, closed style. We kind of discourage wood fences, but those are allowed. Someone could do wrought iron, but that's maybe gonna happen near the legacy district, but probably not at all. Someone could do picket style. That could be wood or PVC, or whatever material, you know, we're not trying to be that specific, but I can't really picture a different type of, you know, something bizarre that someone would do.
Right.
Well, in my travels, I have seen people that have taken 15 or 20 pallets and nailed them together and called it a fence. I don't think we want that.
Or skis. Taking the
Skis, oh,
Yeah.
together.
I think somebody came with that, right?
I
And it was
I
on
saw
a-
an image of that.
Yeah, I did
recently,
too.
so,
I thought it was at one of these meetings, somebody had a,
See, I think we would want that. That's cool.
yeah, because it depends on what the venue is. Maybe it's like a business that sells skis and it's kind of a
Well,
kitsch thing.
I'm talking mostly about residents.
Right, oh, right, yeah,
Yeah,
no.
you've got car places that use bumpers and stuff and grills for their fence. I don't
Right.
get it all.
So is there anything else, Michael and Lori, that you need from us in terms of any sort of clarity or of direction?
If we're, you know, set on these items on the screen right now, that gives us all the guidance we need to bring forward an amendment to you to hopefully cut down on the number of variation requests in 2023. It sounds like there's a much broader fence discussion to be had. I'm not sure when or if we are planning kind of an overhaul. We have the comp plan coming through eventually. Usually you do zoning after that, so at that time, it might be appropriate to talk about how to overhaul these fence regulations. But yeah, I think this change, what we've discussed tonight, will help a lot. It'll help people have larger yards, and it'll help us cut back on variations.
And maybe it's not a bad idea to like look a year ahead if and when these get adopted and see how it performs, right? If we are reducing that 11 to whatever, 8 now, or whatever it'll be, or 7, and if there's more tweaking needed.
And we have a lot of, inquiries that come in, and we tell them, the current code, and they say, oh, shoot, okay, well, I'll do that. I mean, this will
Right.
make people happier. They don't have to come for a variation. They have a larger yard. I think it'll be pretty palatable for everybody.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, seeing none, you guys have what you want, and we'll move on. The next item on the agenda is good of the order. Staff, do you have anything to present for the good of the order?
Yeah, and not too much. I wanted to let you folks know that as far as like staffing, our director's been working with the rest of village staff to look for a planning manager to come in. So there's been postings through American Planning Association and other places, and that posting window will be closing shortly. So, yeah, that's a whole interview, candidate search process that will still be going forward. And then, really, as far as projects, not too much to update anything new on. We do have an Odyssey development coming back here, so due to some updated covenant-type documents, that'll be added to the proposal, so we anticipate them to come back for a public hearing on April 6th, so we're in the process of doing the notification right now. And then, as far as projects opening, nothing new has really changed. We're looking forward to the Ascend Cannabis dispensary to open shortly, so we'll be hopefully doing our final inspections around the beginning of April, so hopefully their opening will be at that time. And, yeah, the other projects that I mentioned before are the same as before. So Loyola, again, moving fast. Previous zoning cases that we had, Chipotle, Marriott, still in permitting.
Okay. Excellent, thank you, Lori. We'll move on to receiving comments from the public. Seeing no public here, we'll move on to adjourn the meeting. May I have a motion to close today's Plan Commission meeting?
Second?
I heard a motion by Commissioner Merrick, seconded by Commissioner Manny. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned at 8:13 PM.